Good morning, students. Today we start with a new chapter, which is nationalism in India. Uh, in the previous chapter, we had seen about what nationalism essentially meant, which meant that, in general terms, love for your country, love for your motherland, and it was because of the sense of great sense of nationalism rather that we saw in previous chapter how the people came together to unify Germany to make a whole German nation, how people came together to ensure that yes, Italy was unified. Of course, it had taken a whole period of time in history, but ultimately it was unified, and it was because of nationalism that a lot of events happened in 18th century and 19th century Europe. But then this is something because just because we studied about the nationalism in Europe, it does not mean that nationalism is not there among people of different other countries or different other cultures or different other civilizations. We humans are born with that sentiment, that for our sentiment for our motherland, sentiment where we are born and brought up. We love that place, even we might be in some part of the world. There are a lot of Indians who live in US and who have been living in Australia or Europe or Middle East for 20 years, 25 years, but still uh, they would ensure that they learn Hindi, and they learn their mother tongue. Their children learn mother tongue. They, even if they are in New York, they um, celebrate Independence Day and Republic Day and all of that. So nationalism is a very innate part of us. It is there in all of us. So uh, though this chapter is talking to you about our freedom struggle against the British, but it does not necessarily mean that before the British came to India, we had not discovered the sense of nationalism that lived within us. We always were patriotic people, we always loved our motherland, but yes, when we talk about the British, the independence against the British, definitely this point gets highlighted because it would have been impossible to defeat the world's most powerful colonial power of those times, a power which had been for almost 200 years, and to get rid of them without the sense of nationalism, without the sense of patriotism, without the sense of love for the motherland that we had. And that is why we could come together in spite of enormous amount of diversity which is there in India. We could still come together right from Punjab to Manipur to Kashmir to Tamil Nadu. We all could come together and get rid of the British. And you can simply understand one very important fact, that you think that Sardar Bhagat Singh laid off his life at such a young age because he was fighting for the independence of Punjab against the British? Certainly not. Do you think Lokmanya Tilak was fighting only for the people of Maharashtra? Clearly not. Sardar Patel, do you think he only wanted to get rid of British so that the Gujaratis could live in an independent India? Clearly not. And similar thing, do you think Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose laid his life and sacrificed everything just because he felt that the people of Bengal should be free? Clearly not. It was about a sense of nationhood. It was about a sense of patriotism. They wanted India to be independent. They wanted India, the people of India, to live in a free country, breathe free air, whether they were in Tripura or Manipur or Kashmir or Tamil Nadu or Kerala or Gujarat or Rajasthan or Bihar or Madhya Pradesh. It did not matter to them at all. Okay, and that is what we would see in this chapter and study in this chapter, that how nationalism played a role in ensuring that the British went back to their motherland and they left India. So coming to the second paragraph, yes, this is an important sentence. The sense of being oppressed under Colonialism provide a shared bond that tied many different groups together, but each class and group felt the effects of colonialism differently. Their experiences were varied, and their notions of freedom were not always the same. Uh, the Congress under Mahatma Gandhi tried to forge these groups together within one movement, but the unity did not emerge without conflict. Now, it is very obvious, students, a country with a size which is so massive, a country which has a population, at least when we talk about when India got free in around, that is the period around 1930s and 1940s and 1920s, the population of India was more than 30 crores. It still was one of the, after China, that is the highest populated country in the world. Okay, so naturally, with so much of diversity, where people of Tamil Nadu are so different in their belief system, in their cultural system, to the people of Bihar for that matter, or people of Rajasthan are so different from the people of Kerala, or people of Tripura would be so different from the people of Maharashtra or Manipur for that matter. So naturally they were bound to be mental blocks. They were bound to be different interests among different sections of the society, because farmers would be having their own set of interests, the businessmen or traders would be having their own set of interests. So people who live in the tribal areas of India, they would have their own set of interests. And then we had the system of caste system in India, whereby the Brahmins would have their certain other agendas, and the people from the oppressed category, they would have their own set of agendas. They would like to see a different India. The Brahmins would like to see a different India. So this was essentially that this was the kind of challenge that the freedom fighters during those times faced: how to unify everyone under one umbrella, because you could not get rid of your adversary, which who was as powerful as the British, and who was as smart as the British, and who was as cunning as the British, because it would have been impossible to get rid of them without bringing everyone together. Had the Sardars been thinking that yes, we are only concerned about Punjab, and the Bengalis been thinking we are only worried about Bengal, British would have never left India. So that's what we would also see in this chapter, and we would see certain movements, or the landmark movements, the most important movements and events during our freedom struggle, which facilitated the exit of British from India. Otherwise, it would have been extremely difficult. Then they would have left when they would have wished, not when we would have kicked them out, honestly. Okay, now coming to the next page, we would be starting this chapter, which, or rather, the topic, the First World War, Caliphate, and non-cooperation. Now, students, the First World War, we would be, the First World War is an entirely different chapter altogether. I don't know if it's there in your syllabus, but yes, I wouldn't like to go too much into it, but just an extension of the first chapter which we read, nationalism in Europe. You have to understand that in we had always read about in the previous chapter and discussed the different empires of Europe, the different ruling families of Europe, right from Habsburg to Bourbons, the Austrian Empire, the German Empire, and all of them, the British Empire, then the Spanish, the French, all these played an enormous character, and they were very much there even after the German unification had happened, the Italian unification had happened. They had not just evaporated in Europe. They were very much there. They were very much powerful and influential. So naturally, another trouble was brewing. It was just getting collected. because after the German unification and Italian unification, which happened, if you remember, in 1870, then another definitely tensions were again building up. People were not just happy sitting and minding their own business. They had to poke their noses into the affairs of others, and so naturally the trouble again started building up, and it exploded in the year 1914 when the First World War happened, when the Austrian Chancellor Archduke Ferdinand was murdered. Okay, and that is when the whole crisis exploded and the First World War began. Now, coming to this paragraph here, that first of all, the war created a new economic and political situation. It led to a huge increase in defense expenditure, which was financed by war loans and increased taxes. Custom duties were raised and income tax introduced. Through the war years, prices increased, doubling between 1913 and 1918, leading to extreme hardship for the common people. Now, students, there is one very important difference here. Now, you have to understand this is not a condition or a situation where India was attacked by, probably you know, the the tribals of Afghanistan or the conquerors coming from Turkey. No, it was not that, and we were defending ourselves. No, it was not this case. There was a war which was happening in Europe, thousands of kilometers away. We we had not caused that war, and neither were we at the receiving end of the war. Okay, it was happening among the different European powers and different European families in Europe. But because the British were ruling in India, they needed resources, more and more resources, to fight their own war in Europe. And what they did was, because we were an Indian colony, without taking our consent, without taking us into confidence, they pushed India and the people of India into that First World War, where thousands of soldiers, Indian soldiers, were sent to different battlefields around Europe to fight for the British, and so much of resources and money which was generated in India, all of that was channelized and taken back to Europe so that they could fight against different colonial powers, and just the battle of egos in for the First World War. And naturally, the wars are never a cheap enterprise. That a war is always very, very expensive. Thousands of people get killed, enormous amount of property gets destroyed. The whole war machinery has to be oiled, so that you can take on the enemy. So that all that causes money, and where would all that money come from? Though Indians had no role to play, direct role that is to play in this war in Europe, but then we were laden with taxes uh, to collect money for that war. And naturally, this decision was not going to be popular with the Indians, and they revolted. Okay, thank you.